The Washington Commanders are in a very interesting spot. I was prepared to put the Washington Commanders at number 28 in my power ranking series, but yesterday, May 30th at 1:34 p.m., the Washington Commanders announced several transactions, including the release of cornerback Cameron Dantzler Sr. and the placement of offensive guard Andrew Norwell on the reserve PUP list. In response, they signed safety Terrell Burgess and tight end Brandon Dillon. Teams make these big moves all the time, but I decided to look deeper into where the Commanders would end up, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I placed in 29th, actually jumped the Commanders after these two moves, making the 28th video useless. So I sat on these transactions for a couple of hours, and I decided to make a video discussing the concerns as well as some of the positives of the Washington Commanders. So sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and listen to my opinions on the 2023 Washington Commanders. I'm Chase Keller from Chase Keller Journalism, and thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. I hope you enjoy. So if you guys have been looking into my channel, you guys would know I've been making a power ranking series where I go through each team and dive deep into those rosters, just like that franchise guy does if you watch him. And the Washington Commanders were ready to come into 28th. The video was supposed to be uploaded yesterday, May 30th, but 2.5 hours before upload time, those transactions happened, as I mentioned before, and bumped them down to 29th, close to 30th. So instead of going through every single position of the Washington Commanders, I want to talk about the transactions that they made yesterday, some other key dislikes of this roster, and then talk about the better points of this roster. And after thinking further about this team, the Commanders may have a bigger shot at the number 1 overall pick than you may think. So first, let's talk about Cameron Dantzler. One of the 4 transactions that the Washington Commanders made on Tuesday afternoon was the release of cornerback Cameron Dantzler Sr. I have Dantzler at a 76 overall, and he was the second best cornerback on the roster going into the season, likely going to be the third by midseason with Emmanuel Forbes on the come-up. Dantzler was drafted in the 2020 NFL Draft by the Minnesota Vikings, and I was pretty high on him already. He had a very promising start to his career, as in 2020, he started his career by allowing these statistics: 43 for 67, 498 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, which is a passer rating of 94 flat. His run defense and his containing ability showed immense promise early on, and he immediately capitalized that following the 2020 season. In 2021, Cameron Dantzler missed only 4 tackles of his 49 attempts, and he was possibly the best run defending corner in the NFL. He did all of this while containing good statistics, allowing 33 of 63 targets to be caught, 311 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception when targeted. This translates into a passer rating of only 70.3, which is extremely impressive for a young corner like Dantzler. After the 2020 season, I put Cameron Dantzler on breakout watch, and he had a better season but didn't particularly break out, so I did it again in 2021. As going into his 2022 season, I thought he could become possibly a top 10 to 15 cornerback in the NFL. I was wrong, I'll admit. A bad coverage year allowed him to take a big step backwards, as in 2022, he allowed 39 of his 50 targets to be caught, 396 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. He allowed the highest passer rating of his career with 113, allowed the highest completion percentage of his career, and had no interceptions for the first time in his career. He also took a huge step back in run defense, and he was easily had the worst year of his career while being a liability in Minnesota's defense. So what to do but release Cam Dantzler? The Commanders ended up picking him up off of waivers, and after 2 months with Washington and only a week into OTAs, they let him go. Reportedly, he showed up overweight to OTAs, as last season he was 6'2", 185 pounds, and he reportedly came in at over 200, and him and Emmanuel Forbes also have very similar play styles with their lean frame and their really good anticipation abilities. So I know we haven't seen anything of Dantzler in a Commander's uniform, so Can we really call this release valid? From all I know, Dantzler could possibly be a big liability and showed it early on with the Commanders. The release also shows a big focus on the depth and youth of that cornerback room, as he was actually one of the older guys near the front of the depth chart along with Kendall Fuller. From what we have seen out of Dantzler, I still believe the Commanders are losing a valuable starting piece with this release, and I disagree with the decision to release Dantzler. He is still 24 years old, still has potential to be a cornerback one in any defense, but after 2022, maybe those allegations went away and Washington saw them firsthand in the offseason. But still, I'm going to have to disagree with the Washington Commanders' decision to release Dantzler. I love the upside that he has, and even if he's a cornerback 3 or cornerback 4, his cap hit was $2.7 million, which isn't terrible. I'm expecting Dantzler to be a popular free agent, and within a week or two, we should see him with a new team. Along with the Cameron Dantzler release, the Washington Commanders announced that Andrew Norwell, their starting left guard, was placed on the reserve/physically unable to play list with a lingering right elbow injury that we have seen since last season. The PUP placement was inevitable as he did fail a physical, but they're still expected to release him as well. Before Washington, he spent 4 years in Carolina and 4 years with Jacksonville, but only lasted 1 year with Washington, and he's going to become a free agent going for his 10th NFL season. Now, I have Norwell at a 70 overall, and before 2022, that 70 was higher. 2022 was a big setback though, and he showed a lot of mediocrity with Washington. His pass blocking was pretty mediocre just in general, as in 639 pass blocking snaps, he allowed 29 pressures, 21 hurries, and 4 sacks. The run blocking was better, but it wasn't better by much. He was more efficient in a zone scheme, but he took a big step back when it came to spatial awareness for running back gaps in 2022. With the release of Norwell, we should be expecting that Washington depth chart to maneuver around a lot. With Norwell, the starting right side and center was Nick Gates in the middle, Sadiq Charles at right guard, and Sam Cosmi at right tackle. With the Norwell release, the next best guard becomes Nick Gates as he flexes out of the center role and moves into left guard, and Sadiq Charles sticks to right, and slotting into the starting center role is rookie Ricky Stromberg, who I had a 7th round grade on, and he ended up going in the 3rd round. But with that being said, this offensive line entirely outside of left tackle is still in a massive flux. Who will end up playing left and right guard? Who's going to end up slotting into the center? Will it be Nick Gates, or will Ricky Stromberg end up being the day 1 starter for Washington? So my question is, if the Commanders release Andrew Norwell, will it be valid? Given the state of the offensive line? No. Given the state of how mediocre Norwell played in 2022? Yes. So what is it? I'm just going to go ahead and say no. I think Norwell going on PUP was inevitable in the first place, but I still do think that Norwell has a valuable spot as a starting guard on the roster. Even if you saw mediocrity, your backups aren't that much better, and it's not like you're paying Norwell loads of money to start. If the team wants to develop Ricky Stromberg at center, it's best to have Norwell on the roster so you can keep Nick Gates at center and further develop Ricky Stromberg. If you get rid of Norwell, you are now slotting Stromberg at starting center unless you want to start Chris Paul at right guard. So in the end, I do not agree with the release if the Commanders end up pulling through with it, but it hasn't been done yet, so we will see what happens. In my 2023 NFL Power Rankings, I have the Washington Commanders listed as the worst quarterback room in the NFL at a 69.6, the only QB room that is below a 70. And that is primarily because your best quarterback is a 70 overall and your backup is a 66. So with the uncertainty of this QB room, we have to dive into each quarterback and discuss which of these quarterbacks is the better starting option and which of them is more than likely to start week 1. Jacoby Brissett is where it starts, and he's the 70 overall in this roster, and he's that epitome of a QB that does what he needs to. He's been a backup for both Tua Tagovailoa and Deshaun Watson the past 2 seasons, and when he was working as Tua's backup in 2021, he was fairly solid, but he took that extra leap up to be a very reliable backup quarterback in 2022 when filling in for Deshaun Watson in Cleveland. Brissett is that guy who won't make stupid mistakes, but he also isn't that flashy player. with his career production, he's likely not a great starter or a great game manager like you would say a Ryan Tannehill, but Brissett is a fairly solid developmental piece. And then behind him, you have Sam Howell at a 66 overall, who is a solid backup who was selected in the 5th round last year. He only played in one game in 2022, so a lot of his positives and negatives are still branching from what he did well and what he did bad as a college prospect. Sam Howell has a good mix of passing traits. He's mobile when he's needed to be mobile, and he's fantastic with a clean pocket. But he doesn't have any flashy traits just like Brissett, and when it comes to poise, he's not a great quarterback. So honestly, Brissett may be the perfect guy to develop Sam Howell, as they have very similar skill sets and play styles, and they both aren't too flashy. So Sam Howell may develop in the same path as Jacoby Brissett did. So with that being said, while it's inevitable that Sam Howell will eventually be the starting quarterback, I think Brissett should start week 1. He's played pretty good as a backup the last 2 years. He started last year, of course, with Deshaun Watson being suspended, and Brissett was debatably the better quarterback of the two last season. But Sam Howell couldn't ask for a better mix of development and starting opportunity. So I've talked about a lot of negatives of the Washington Commanders, but they do have positives on the roster. And it starts with whoever's at quarterback. They have fantastic surround sound and wide receivers to work with. It starts with Terry McLaurin, who I have in an 87 overall. He's been extremely consistent throughout the years, and he kind of reminds me of Mike Evans. The most appealing statistics may be the drops, as since 2020, he's at a 3.2% drop rate, which is honestly fantastic for a wide receiver of his liking, especially when he's a pretty good deep threat. Curtis Samuel's up next. He's at a 76 overall, and he's a very fun wide receiver. Deebo Samuel is one of my favorites, so that does add up a little bit. And Curtis Samuel plays very similarly to him with the rushing and receiving appeal. When he was at college with Ohio State, fans had no clue what position this man was going to play. If he was going to be running back or receiver. In my opinion, he's a wide receiver, but he can also be called a gadget player. In 2022, Curtis Samuel had 38 rushes and 64 receptions, a pretty good mix of the two. And while he's too inconsistent to be reliable, the elusiveness is obviously there, and he has the appeal to work in many different sets with Washington. And then there's the developing Jahan Dotson, who's also at a 76. He's rised up 3 overall since his rookie season last year, and he needs more volume. Even though he saw injuries and setbacks in 2022, I want to see more targets, more receptions, and maybe even more touchdowns, despite 7 of them being very impressive for a rookie. Alongside the great surround sound, the defense is still fairly solid. The linebackers aren't great, but the secondary is still good, alongside the fact that the safeties get developed really well. But I want to showcase the defensive line. On the left edge, you have Montez Sweat. I have an 87 overall on him, and I love him going into 2023. I would have had a breakout grade on him if I was doing a legitimate power rankings video, and it's simply because he has a consistent skill set in pass and run. He's got fantastic instincts, and his discipline has improved throughout the years. In 2022, he had 62 pressures, which is elite. He also saw immense improvements as a tackler last year, and if he continues to improve in every aspect, he could become a top 5 edge rusher in the NFL. Jonathan Allen's the first guy on the inside who really impresses me. I have him at a 91 overall, and he is an extremely effective pass rushing guy on the inside. The last 3 seasons, Jonathan Allen has seen these statistics: 1480 pass rush snaps, 164 pressures, which is 1 every 9 snaps, 107 hurries, which is 1 every 13.8 snaps, and 21 sacks, which is 1 every 70.5 snaps. He had 10 sacks in 2021, followed up with 8 sacks in 2022, and clearly he can finish through the play. He deserves the massive 4-year, $72 million contract that the Commanders just paid him this offseason. And on the other side of the interior line, you have Daron Payne, who I have at a 76 overall, and he's the worst starting defensive lineman, which is amazing for this team. He is also very good pass rushing on the inside. And his last 3 seasons have consisted of 1620 pass rush snaps, 133 pressures, 86 hurries, and 23 sacks. I said with Allen that he gets 1 sack every 70.5 snaps. Daron Payne gets a sack every 70.4 snaps. So when you have a guy like Montez Sweat who's consistently getting the pressures, and the 2 guys on the inside who are also getting pressures but also finishing through with those pressures, you're going to have an elite pass rush, quite possibly the best pass rush in the NFL next year. And then finally, you have the make or break Chase Young, who I have an 81 overall. He saw a 1 overall improvement since coming out of college, and he had elite flashes in his rookie season. But since his rookie season, he has lost a lot of snaps due to injuries. And I do feel bad for him, to be fair, but his second and third seasons were just okay. They weren't amazing. And of course, there's that injury concern that I've already mentioned. Nonetheless, Chase Young is still a consistent piece on the line, and he finishes out this fantastic defensive line. So sure, the Washington Commanders have positives, but they also have the negatives, and yesterday's transactions just proved that the Commanders are not a well-built team. I'm hoping to see more than a 3-14 record out of the Washington Commanders, especially with the guy like Sam Howell in the QB room. I love Sam Howell as a personality, but this team is in so much uncertainty, especially after the transactions, that who knows what is going to happen with this roster coming up. I'm Chase Keller, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys for choosing this channel as your source of sports coverage, and I will see you guys in the next Power Rankings video.